didn't think I'd actually do it. That's the part that still gets me even now. He sat across from me at that his kitchen table in his house, with his coffee going cold between us, and he looked at me like I was a child who'd said something amusing. Like I didn't understand how the world worked. Like I would eventually come around to his way of thinking, because everyone always did. He was 51 years old. He had a company with his name on the building. He had a lawyer on retainer and a financial advisor who played golf with the sitting congressman. And I was 29, 7 weeks pregnant, and sitting in a chair that cost more than my monthly rent. He smiled at me, patient, practiced. Let's be reasonable, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my purse, thanked him for the coffee I hadn't touched, and walked out to my car. I sat in the driveway for maybe 3 minutes. My hands were completely steady on the steering wheel. That surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. Then I drove straight to my sister's apartment, sat down on her couch, and said, "I need the name of a good family law attorney." She stared at me. What happened? He offered me money to go away. How much? I told her. She was quiet for a second. Then, and you said no, I said I'd think about it. She knew me well enough to know what that meant. I need to back up. I met him through work. Not in the way that sounds. I wasn't his employee. I was a project coordinator for a commercial interior design firm, and his company had hired us to redesign 3 floors of their Dallas office. He was the client. We were in the same conference rooms, the same walkthroughs, the same budget reviews for about 4 months. He was charming in the way that men like him are charming. Attentive, funny in meetings, always remembered your name and what you'd said the last time. He asked good questions. He made you feel like the smartest person in the room when you answered them. I knew he was divorced. He'd mentioned it once, offhandedly, the way people mention things they've already processed and moved past. 2 kids, both in college, settled, clean. What I didn't know, what I found out much later, was that settled and clean had been his description, not his attorney's. We started seeing each other about a month after the project wrapped. It felt natural. It felt like something that had been building slowly and finally had room to exist. He was thoughtful. He brought things up from conversations we'd had weeks earlier. He took me to a restaurant in Fort Worth that required a reservation 3 months out and acted like it was a casual Tuesday. I was careful. Or I thought I was. I'm 30 now, and I understand that being careful in your late 20s means something different than you think it does when you're in the middle of it. 8 months in, I found out I was pregnant. I sat with it for 4 days before I told him. I needed to know how I felt before I had to navigate how he felt. I went on long walks. I called my sister. I cried once in the shower, not because I was unhappy, but because I was so completely unprepared, and I needed somewhere to put that. By the time I told him, I had already arrived somewhere. I was going to have this baby. That wasn't a decision I made dramatically. It was just a decision that was already true when I looked at it clearly. He took the news quietly. He nodded. He asked some questions. Timing, how I was feeling, what my doctor had said. All the right questions in the right order. I remember thinking, he's good at this. He's good at responding to things. We talked for 2 hours that night. He said he needed some time to think. I said that was fine. I meant it. He called me 3 days later and asked if I could come over. That's when I met the kitchen table. He'd clearly thought it through. He had a number ready, which told me he'd spoken to someone, his lawyer, his financial advisor, maybe both. The number was significant. It was the kind of number designed to feel generous, to feel like proof that he was a good person who was handling a difficult situation with care and seriousness. He said it would cover everything, a fresh start. No complications for either of us. He used the word complications twice. I asked him what, specifically, he thought the complications were. He shifted in his chair. He said his kids were adults now. They had relationships with him. This would be disruptive. He said his company was in a particular phase, and scrutiny right now would be, he paused, premature. He said he was at a point in his life where he'd made peace with certain chapters being closed. He was 51 years old, and he was talking about a baby like it was a chapter. I asked him one question. I said, "Are you asking me to terminate this pregnancy?" He said, "I'm asking you to consider what's best for everyone involved." I picked up my purse. I thanked him. I left. My sister's name is Vera. She's 4 years older than me, practical in a way that I'm not always, and she has a very good memory for information that turns out to be useful later. She's the one who remembered that her college roommate had become a family law attorney in Austin and had a reputation for taking on high-asset cases. Her name was Ms. Okonkwo. I called her office the next morning. She had an opening 2 days later. I drove to Austin. She was direct in the way I needed her to be. She asked me questions in a specific order, and I understood from the order that she was building something, mapping a structure I couldn't fully see yet. She asked about the length of our relationship. She asked whether I had any written communication from him, texts, emails, in which he acknowledged the pregnancy or his involvement. She asked about his business structure, whether his company was privately held. I had kept everything. I'm a project coordinator. I document. She looked at what I'd brought her and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "In Texas, there's no cap on child support for high-income earners the way some other states have. Support is calculated as a percentage of net resources, and net resources include more than salary, business income, distributions, investment returns. We'd request full financial disclosure." I asked her what that process looked like. She told me. All of it. The filing, the service of process, the likelihood of a response, what discovery would involve, how long it typically took. I asked, what if he contests paternity? She said, then we do a paternity test and we proceed from there. Texas allows prenatal paternity testing. It's a simple process. We'd request it. I sat with that for a second. I said, let's file. I won't pretend the next several months were easy. They weren't. I was navigating a pregnancy alone, which I want to be precise about because alone doesn't mean without support. Vera drove down from Oklahoma City twice to take me to appointments. My mom called every Sunday and didn't give me advice I hadn't asked for, which was its own kind of love. Two of my closest friends from college showed up the weekend I turned 30 and took me to breakfast, and then we sat around and watched movies all afternoon, and nobody made it weird. What I mean by alone is, the person who was supposed to be there wasn't there. There's a specific shape to that absence. It's not dramatic. It's just always slightly present in small moments. The 20-week ultrasound, the conversation with my OB about birth plans, the Thursday nights when I couldn't sleep, and the apartment was very quiet. His attorney contacted Ms. Okonkwo about 6 weeks after we filed. The tone of the letter was what she predicted, measured, formal, suggesting that an amicable private arrangement was preferable to litigation and offering to discuss terms. Ms. Okonkwo's response was brief. We were proceeding under Texas Family Code. We were requesting full financial disclosure. We were prepared to request prenatal paternity testing at the appropriate stage. She told me she got a call from his attorney within 48 hours. He wanted to know if I would consider mediation. She asked me. I said we can discuss mediation after full disclosure is on the table. There was a pause in the negotiations for about 3 weeks. Then his attorney's office sent over the first round of documents. Ms. Okonkwo called me the evening she reviewed them. She said, his net resources are considerably higher than what he likely communicated to you informally. I said I understood. She said, I want to make sure you understand what that means for the calculation. I said I understood that too. The paternity question resolved itself without a court order. His attorneys, once they'd seen the direction this was heading, recommended he acknowledge paternity voluntarily and proceed. Miss Okonkwo told me this was common in high-asset cases. Contesting paternity just added time and cost and didn't typically change the outcome when the evidence was clear. He signed the acknowledgement in March. My daughter was born in April. Her name is June. I named her after my grandmother, who was the most quietly fierce person I've ever known. She died when I was 16, and I still think about what she would have said about various situations in my life. I think she would have had opinions about this one. June was 6 pounds 4 ounces. She had her father's forehead and my mouth, and a completely unique expression of patient skepticism that I'm fairly sure she developed on her own. My mom was in the delivery room. Vera was in the waiting area and cried when she saw her, which she will deny. The final child support order was issued when June was 3 months old. I'm not going to put the number here. What I will say is that Ms. Okonkwo had been accurate in her projections, and that the figure was based on a full accounting of his income across all sources, not just his salary. He did not go pale exactly when the order was issued. I wasn't in the room with him. But his attorney apparently asked for a 60-day extension to assess compliance mechanisms, which Ms. Okonkwo told me was legal language for they needed time to adjust. She didn't seem surprised. I wasn't either. People ask me sometimes, usually women who've heard the story secondhand and want the version from me, whether I was angry, whether I did this out of anger. I have to think about how to answer that honestly. I wasn't angry in the way that people mean when they ask that. I wasn't motivated by wanting to hurt him or humiliate him or make his life difficult. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. What I was motivated by was much simpler and also much harder to articulate. I was going to have a daughter, and my daughter deserved to have both of her parents be accountable. Not present. I wasn't asking him to be present. I wasn't asking him to sit at the table for Thanksgiving or come to school plays or any of the things that make a father in the real sense. He had made himself unavailable for all of that when he sat across from me with a number in mind and used the word complications. What I was asking the court to recognize was that he had a financial obligation to the child he had helped create. That's not anger. That's just math with legal standing. The part that did make me angry, and I'll admit this, was the assumption that I wouldn't know what to do, that I would take the money because I wouldn't understand that I had other options, that I would be impressed by a large number and not think to ask. Compared to what? Compared to 18 years of legally enforceable support from a man whose net resources included multiple income streams? Compared to a daughter who knows, whatever else is true, that the law saw her and said she counted. That assumption that I wouldn't know, that one took me a while to let go of. June is 18 months old now. She is obsessed with dogs. All dogs, any dogs, regardless of size or temperament. She says dog as her clearest word and applies it to cats, squirrels, and once a very large houseplant. She is exactly who she is, completely and without apology, in the way that very small children are before the world starts asking them to be smaller. Her father has not been in contact. That was his choice, and I've accepted it for what it is, a piece of information about him, not about her. I don't know what I'll tell her when she's old enough to ask. I think I'll tell her the truth, that I made the choice I made because I believe she deserved to be legally recognized, and that what her father chose to do with that recognition was his own decision. What I know is this. I walked into a kitchen and someone told me, politely and with a significant number attached, that the easiest thing would be to disappear. And I decided that the easiest thing and the right thing were not the same. I drove to my sister's apartment. I called a lawyer. I documented everything. And my daughter's name is June, and she knows what a dog is, and she is here. That's the whole story. That's all of it. The rest is just paperwork, and I was always good at paperwork. I think about that kitchen table more than I expected to, not with bitterness. I want to be precise about that, because it would be easy to frame this as a story about anger, and it isn't. What I think about is the specific moment he smiled at me. Patient, like he already knew how it ended. Like the number he prepared was the conclusion of an argument I hadn't even made yet. What he miscalculated wasn't the number, it was me. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what actually gets people through hard things. Not the dramatic version, not the movie version where someone stands up and gives a speech and the music swells. The real version, the version where you sit in a car for 3 minutes with your hands on the steering wheel, completely steady, and then you drive to your sister's apartment and say, "I need a lawyer." What got me through was not a single thing. It was three things working together, and I didn't have names for them at the time. But I do now. The first was knowing what was right, not just for me, but for June before she was even born. That's not a feeling, it's a decision you make, and then you keep making, every morning, especially the mornings when it would be easier to let it go. There were moments, I'll be honest, when I thought about what it would mean to just take the money and close the door. And every time I thought about it, I came back to the same place. My daughter deserved to be seen by the law as a person who counted. That mattered more than easy. Knowing that and living by it even when it cost something was what kept the whole thing from falling apart. The second was understanding how things actually worked. Miss Okonkwo didn't just reassure me, she explained the structure, net resources, financial disclosure, how percentages function when income comes from multiple streams. I walked into that first meeting thinking I knew roughly what I was dealing with. I walked out understanding that roughly had been doing a lot of heavy lifting. Knowledge changed what was possible. It always does. The people who take the money aren't always less brave. Sometimes they just don't know yet that they have other options. The third was staying steady when staying steady was genuinely hard. That's not toughness in the way people romanticize it. It's smaller than that. It's driving to Austin. It's answering the attorney's questions in order. It's not calling him when you can't sleep at 2 a.m., even though part of you wants to. It's showing up to the 20-week ultrasound alone and being okay, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've decided that hurt is not the same as wrong. June is 18 months old. She knows what a dog is, and she has opinions about it. I made a choice in a kitchen, and then I made it again every day after that. And the world, slowly, through paperwork and court dates and a very calm attorney, reflected that choice back. That's how it works. Not as punishment for him, not as reward for me, just as consequence. What you do, and how clearly you understand what you're doing, and how long you're willing to hold the line, those things add up. They always add up. I was always good at paperwork.